"About 3 hours." She leaned her head against him, and he put his arm around her. "I guess I am a little tired," she said, "but don't let me go to sleep." "All right, Ginny. It's only 3 hours and never any more, if we aren't lucky in the morning, and if we aren't lucky, I don't want to have wasted our last 3 hours." Tal Coranth stood before the window again and watched the city as it slept in the pre-dawn darkness. How many slept in the city? Once there had been 3 million in the city, but each census found the population to be less. 5 years before, there had been less than 1 million. 2/3 of the city was a beautiful shell that housed only the robots that cared for it. What was wrong? And why had it never occurred to him before that there was something wrong? He went back to his desk, where the material from the Terran ship littered the eternally top of it, and sat down again. He was tired and frustrated. A menace faced Tharnar, and no one seemed to realize it. The coming of the barbarians had awakened him to the fallacy of trusting the robot fleet, but there was still another danger, and the robot fleet would be more helpless before the newly discovered danger than it would be before the Terran ships. He pressed a button, and music filled the room, music that had always before been soothing and restful to hear, but it sounded flat and meaningless compared with the throbbing barbarian music he'd heard that night, and he switched it off again. It was wrong. It was one of the latest compositions, one that had been acclaimed as almost as good as one of the classics. Almost as good, like the play Thralna had attended, like the art exhibits, the athletic records, the scientific discoveries, like everything in the city and on Tharnar. Almost as good, but never quite as good as they had been 50,000 years before. Was that part of the answer? No, not part of the answer. Part of the problem. Part of the danger greater than a barbarian invasion. There was no answer that he could see. Something had been lost by the Thanarians 50,000 years before, and he was neither sure what it was nor how to give it back to them. He pressed the button that would connect him with Security Officer Ten Quoth. Of the two problems, it was only within his power to handle the immediate phase of the first problem, to make the final authorization of the execution of the Terrans. Bob looked again at the window, which had lightened to a pale grey square. It was already daylight outside. It would not be long until the guards came for them. Virginia had fallen asleep at last, more tired than she had thought, and she still slept with her head against his shoulder and with his arm around her to support her. He straightened his legs slowly, not wanting them to be numb from lack of circulation when the guards came, and not wanting to awaken Virginia to grim reality any sooner than he had to. But the slight movement was enough. She opened her eyes drowsily, then the sleepiness gave way to the hard jolt of remembrance and realization. She looked at the grey window and asked, "How much longer?" "Within a few minutes." "I wish you hadn't let me sleep." "You were tired." "I didn't want to sleep. I didn't think I would." Then she changed the subject, as though to keep it from going into the sentimental. "I see the robot never did come back for the tray. We'll be leaving a messy room, won't we? I wonder if they'll disinfect it to make sure it's clean when we're gone. You know," she smiled a little, "fleas and things." She lifted her face to kiss him on the cheek. Then she rose and moved to the window. "It's cloudy," she said. "There's a mist of rain fallen, and it's cloudy outside. I guess it's already later than we thought." He went over to stand beside her, and he saw that the morning was alight with near sunrise behind the grey clouds. "It's out there waiting for us, the cat," she said. He saw it, standing silver-white in the grey morning, gleaming in the rain, and with its slim, dynamic lines making it look as though it might at any moment hurl itself roaring into the sky. "It's a beautiful ship," she said. "I wonder what they'll do with it when they—" A sound came from the far end of the corridor, a snapped command in Tharnarian. The command was followed at once by the sound of footsteps approaching their cell, the heavy tread of robots, and the lighter, softer steps of the guards. Virginia turned away from the window, and they faced the cell door as they waited. "This is it," she said. "Are you afraid, Ginny?" "Afraid?" She laughed up at him, a laugh that came only a little too quickly. "It's like a play, set a long time ago on Earth, coffee and pistols at dawn. Only I don't think they're bringing us any coffee, and if we get a pistol, it'll have to be one of theirs." It isn't over with till the end, and maybe we could change the ending and play for them. I'll be watching you, Bob, so I can help you the moment you make the try." The Thanorian guards stopped outside the door, their blasters in their hands. One of them unlocked the door, and 2 robots entered, guards locking the big door behind the robots the moment they were inside. The robots carried no blasters, nothing but 3 lengths of chain. The Thanorian leader outside the door rasped a command. "You will both turn to face the window with your hands behind you." Bob did not obey at once, but appraised the situation. The robots were massive things, more than 600 pounds in weight, their metal bodies invulnerable to any attack he could make with his bare hands. But there was one chance in 10,000. If he could catch the first robot by surprise and send it toppling into the cell door, its weight might be enough to break the lock of the door. He struck it with his shoulder, all his weight and strength behind the attack, and Virginia's small body struck it a moment later. But it was like shoving against a stone wall. The robot rocked for the briefest instant, then it threw out a foot to regain its balance. The other robot snapped a chain around his wrists while Virginia fought it. "Don't, Ginny," he said, ceasing his own struggles. "It's no use, honey." She stopped then, and the robot jerked her arms around behind her back to lock the second chain around her wrists. She smiled up into his dark and somber face. "We tried, Bob. They were just too big for us." A third chain, longer than the first 2, was produced. He felt the cool metal of it encircle his neck, and heard the lock snap shut. The other end of it was locked around Virginia's neck. The cell door was opened, and the guard leader commanded, "Step forward. The robots will guide you." They stepped forward, the robots beside them gripping their arms with steel fingers. The chain around their necks rattled from the movement of walking, linking them together like a pair of captive wild animals. Bob wondered if the chain had been solely as another precaution to prevent their escape, or if it had been a deliberate act of contempt. The Thanorians feared them, and because they feared them, they hated them. Did it bolster the morale of the Thanorians to deliberately treat them as though they were animals? They stepped out into the cool dawn, into a small courtyard with a black stone wall at its farther side. The sky was bleakly grey, and the rain was falling as a cold mist, dampening Virginia's face as she looked up at him. "The last mile, Bob." "Walk it straight and steady, Ginny. They're watching." "How else would we walk it?" she asked calmly. They came to the wall where a metal ring had been set in the stone. There was a chain fastened to the ring, and when the robots had swung them around with their backs to the wall, the free end of the chain was locked to the center of the chain around their necks. Again, it could be an added precaution, or it could be the final attempt to let their execution be like the killing of a pair of dangerous animals. It didn't really matter, of course. 2 of the armed robots who had walked with the guards took up a position 20 feet in front of them, blasters in their metal hands. The robots who had chained them stepped to one side, away from the line of fire. The leader of the guards lifted his arm to look at his watch and said something to the robots. The robots lifted their blasters at the words and leveled them, one aimed at Virginia's heart and one at Bob's. But the expected blast did not come. The guard leader continued to observe his watch. Apparently the first command had meant only aim. The fire command would come when the hands of the watch reached the 3312 mark. Virginia's shoulder was warm against his arm, but her hand, when it found his behind their backs, was cold. "They cheated us," she said. "We were supposed to have a whole firing squad." The guard leader gave another command, and there was a double click as the robots pressed the buttons that would ready their blasters for firing. Virginia swayed a little for the first time, a movement too small for the Thanorians to see, and one from which she recovered almost at once. I'm all right," she said. "I'm not afraid, Bob." "Of course you're not, Ginny, of course you're not." The guard leader had returned his attention to his watch, and the seconds went by, long seconds in which the only sound was the almost inaudible whisper of the rain against the stone wall behind them. Virginia looked up at him for the last time, the cold mist wet on her face. "We've had a lot of fun together, Bob. We never expected it to end so soon, but we knew all the time that it might. We'll go together, and that's the way we always wanted it to be, wherever and whenever it might happen." Then she faced forward again, and they waited, the rain whispering in the wall behind them, and forming in crystal drops on the chain around their necks. He did not waver again as she stood beside him, and he knew she would not when the end came. The guard leader dropped his arm, as though he no longer needed to refer to his watch. He glanced at them very briefly, then turned to the robots, his face revealing the command he was going to give. Virginia's hand tightened on his own in farewell, and he could feel the pulse of her wrist racing hard and fast. But she stood very straight as she looked into the blaster, and they heard the final command to their robot executioners. "Surrender!